Hey, BBN, maybe the nil deal isn't the reason for Kentucky's basketball problems. Let's analyze. The debate surrounding Kentucky basketball has gained momentum again in recent days, and once again, the nil issue is at the center of discussions. With recent losses accumulating frustration among fans and fueling external criticism, it has become almost automatic to point to the impressive numbers of the contracts as the simplest explanation for a team that still cannot translate investment into consistent performance. The estimated value of around $22 million has been repeatedly cited as a symbol of waste, both by rivals and by Wildcats fans themselves, as if it by itself justified the lack of harmony on the court. However, observing only this surface layer can be a convenient and misguided way to explain a problem that is much more complex. The idea that high salaries weaken athletic performance is challenged by the very reality of modern basketball. The argument that a player would stop throwing themselves at a loose ball because they are financially comfortable doesn't hold up when you look at what happens at other levels of the sport. The same system that generates multi-million-dollar contracts in college basketball has also produced athletes like Shai Gilgeous-Alexander, a former reserve at Kentucky, who recently signed a historic contract in the NBA and, even so, continues to play with maximum intensity, leading his team to one of the best starts to a season in the league. The comparison is extreme, of course, but it serves to dismantle the thesis that money, in isolation, erodes competitiveness. Even within the college scene itself, there is no shortage of examples of very well-paid players who compete at a very high level, deliver results, and sustain winning projects. If the problem were simply financial, the solution would be almost absurd. Reduce salaries to try by effort? The logic doesn't hold up. At some point, the determining factor ceases to be the amount invested and becomes a fit between people, roles, expectations, and leadership. It is at this point that the debate about Kentucky's current situation gains depth. The roster assembled for the season is numerous, talented, and expensive. From the beginning, this was seen as a good problem, a sign of market strength and sporting ambition. But the very size of the group brings with it mathematical and human challenges. A game only has 200 minutes available. Possessions are limited. Not everyone can play 30 minutes, shoot 10 times, or be a protagonist. When many players arrive with high status, substantial contracts, and naturally high expectations about their role, managing those expectations becomes as important as any tactical strategy. It is in this context that Mark Pope's work should be analyzed more carefully. He didn't arrive in Lexington as an indifferent or apathetic coach. On the contrary, his almost permanent optimism is one of his most evident traits and, for a long time, was seen as an important asset in rebuilding the program's culture. Pope publicly demonstrates how much he cares about his players and the university, and this is evident in his interviews and how he handles criticism. At the same time, the season has also shown how challenging it is to transform positive rhetoric into practical responses on the court when not all the pieces have fit together ideally. The disconnect that sometimes appears between the coaching staff and the roster cannot be placed solely on the shoulders of the athletes. The responsibility is shared. The assembling of the group, the promises made during recruitment and on the transfer portal, the management of egos, and the clear definition of roles are all part of the same puzzle. When these variables clash with the reality of the game, frustrations arise, performance drops, and there's a feeling that something isn't flowing as it should, regardless of how much has been invested. Even so, there is an important point to highlight positively. Kentucky is seeking answers, not hiding from them. Instead of accepting superficial explanations, the program has been forced to confront structural issues regarding identity, fit, and competitive maturity. And this, while painful in the short term, may be essential for a more solid adjustment in the medium and long term. Mark Pope himself, even under pressure, doesn't abandon his constructive stance. He knows that money doesn't guarantee wins, But he also understands that expectations are part of the package when leading one of the most traditional and closely watched programs in college basketball. Let's move forward. The 35-point loss once again highlighted the gap between what this team was designed to be and what has been able to deliver on the court against strong opponents. 5 weeks into the season, the Wildcats continue to stumble precisely in the games that should serve as a real barometer of the project. Even so, amidst such a tough scenario and a streak of 4 losses in elite conference matchups, one specific detail managed to emerge as a turning point in the overall picture: the return of Jalen Lowe. Statistically speaking, his performance against Gonzaga was far from inspiring. He played only 14 minutes, scoring 1 point, shooting 0 to 5 from the field, 1 to 2 from a free throw line, grabbing 1 rebound, providing 1 assist, and receiving 1 turnover. A clear picture of a lack of rhythm, of someone still trying to find their rhythm again. But reducing the significance of Lowe's presence to these numbers is to lose sight of what was really at stake that night. For this Kentucky team to try and reorganize, gain coherence, and return to competing at a higher level, the point guard from Pittsburgh needs to be more than just a rotation player. He needs to be the player who arrives surrounded by expectation, pre-selected for the SEC All-Star team alongside Otega Owa, a symbol of a renewal that promised immediate impact. Before any protagonism, however, came the most basic and raw obstacle in sports: health. Lowe missed the entire preseason after dislocating his shoulder in the blue-white game, only making his debut on November 7th against Valparaiso. Shortly after, he was injured again, this time in his shoulder, during a practice after the loss to Louisville, missing another 5 games. Those were weeks of frustration, of watching from the sidelines, of seeing the team struggle on the court without being able to directly interfere. Therefore, completing another game without further physical setbacks, even amidst a crushing defeat, has symbolic weight that only those who live through this process on the inside can fully understand. Lowe made this clear in his post-game speech. There was no euphoria nor complacency, but an almost elemental feeling of gratitude for simply being able to be there. He said he stopped underestimating basketball, that every opportunity to return to court was seen as something to be seized, regardless of victory or defeat. The speech is not rhetorical. It stems from the concrete experience of someone who has had the game taken from their hands repeatedly this season. When you go through that, you recognize the right to see a glimmer of light even in the middle of a night as dark as that one. Mark Pope also quickly grasped his value. The coach, who ironically described his own offense as paralyzed after the loss, made a point of emphasizing the importance of Lowe's return, not only as a technical prospect, but as a living, available piece, ready to begin, albeit slowly, the process of real integration into the team. Pope spoke about the rhythm Lowe can bring to the game, acknowledged a natural rust after so much time off, and made it clear that at the moment, the point guard is still in a developmental phase. At the same time, he didn't hide his excitement about the potential he sees in him and the boost he can offer when he's in ideal condition. This point reveals a lot about the current situation at Kentucky and Mark Pope's own profile. Even under pressure, even amidst inconsistent performances and tough losses, he maintains the ability to look beyond the immediate score. It's not about denying reality, and it is harsh, but about identifying within the chaos which building blocks can still support a gradual reconstruction. For Pope, Lowe is one of those blocks, perhaps one of the most important. The big problem is that no gear moves on its own. Kentucky at this moment lacks cohesion from the first to the last player. There's a lack of clarity in offensive actions, a lack of defensive consistency, a lack of identity. And in this scenario, expecting Lowe, recently returned from 2 shoulder injuries, to solve everything alone will be not only unfair, but unrealistic. What can be demanded now is presence, continuity, minutes on the court, mistakes, adjustments, and above all, health. Only then will there be a foundation for talent to emerge. When Pope states that the only way to bring back the old Jalen Lowe is to put him in the game, even if only for 14 minutes in a largely lost match, he simply exposes a fundamental truth of the sport. There is no shortcut to regaining rhythm. There is no alternative path to building confidence. Everything comes down to the process, however uncomfortable it may be. Share your opinion.